A game that I absolutely adore that came out this year and in my opinion is in contention for my game of the year is Armored Core 6. I love this game, I love it to death. And I love nearly every aspect about the game. But there's a couple pillars of it that people have been a bit antagonistic toward, a bit critical of, if you will, that in my opinion are rather misunderstood. Mainly the art style, which I've already made a video defending, link in the description down below, but also the story and specifically the storytelling of Armored Core 6. And in this video, I want to propose a defense of Armored Core 6's narrative and its idea and methodology in conveying that narrative and story to you, the player. Because I love this game's story so much, and I don't even completely understand everything. And that's kind of the beauty of it. FromSoft are kings at being able to construct this narrative that is gripping, emotional, and compelling, that you don't understand every piece of the puzzle. You gain scattered pieces and remnants that you piece together over time. And I think one of the main reasons this story is a little bit controversial for some people is because of the first 3 chapters of your first playthrough. See, the game is constructed of 3 main playthroughs, where in your first 2 playthroughs, you choose one of 2 routes to go, and after you've acquired both routes, on your 3rd playthrough, you are able to get the true ending, quote-unquote. Some people will argue that,
oh, but Jmulls, they're all technically good endings. Or they're all technically bad endings.
you have to get 2 of them to unlock one that is of massively more lore significance, in my opinion. That's the way I view it. But in your first playthrough, when you're going through the first 3 chapters, you run into a bit of an issue. You are essentially a mercenary, hopping between different corporations, undertaking various jobs, with no really strong characters guiding you outside of Walter, who's your handler, and Air, who is this sentient gasoline voice in your head. I promise you that'll make more sense in the game. And a lot of the story is conveyed through basic dialogue. There's no character models for these characters outside of the armored cores that they pilot. You don't get any facial expressions or dynamics or cutscenes or animations along those lines. You don't really get a lot of stuff like that. The game's focal point is on these radio messages that you receive, or these calls you receive, and then seeing their mechs in action. And you can make a legitimate argument that this is telling, not showing, for some cases, and I do agree. However, I feel that it works in Armored Core more often than it doesn't. And because they're throwing characters and locations and terminology at you back to back to back in these first 3 chapters of your first playthrough, it can be kind of confusing and off-putting, and you don't really know exactly what you're doing, just that you're undertaking these almost random assignments and gaining notoriety all the while. And then, at the end of Chapter 3, you take on the giant ice worm jabroni, and the story itself really starts to pick up from there. And while that can be confusing, I think it's part of the charm of Armored Core 6, and is also kind of the point of what they are trying to do. You are a mercenary on this alien planet called Rubicon. You're an outsider, you're a tourist. They call you a tourist throughout the game. You are learning as you go, piecing the pieces of the puzzle together, and understanding who these characters are over the course of the game. The first 3 chapters are confusing because they are designed to be confusing, as you primarily focus on the objectives that are put in front of you as a mercenary. But when you go back in your subsequent playthroughs to get the alternate endings, because of how well constructed Chapter 4 and 5 are, when you go back to Chapters 1, 2, and 3, you start to put the pieces together. Oh, I know who this character is now. Oh, I know you, and then you, and then you. And you start to see how this story converges and forms around it. You see, FromSoft's style of storytelling is extremely polarizing because it's not a traditional, here's a plot point, here's some character development, here's a plot point. It's not going to follow that traditional format. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just that FromSoft does things differently. They like to drop you into this fantastical, desolate, apocalyptic-esque world and have you find scattered pieces of the puzzle for you to put together at your own unique pace and way. Whether it's from visual design of the environment, or one-off character dialogues, or weapon descriptions, or in this game, the way it tells its story. With the dialogue, with set pieces, with pacing between the different endings, it puts the onus on the player to put these pieces together themselves. And I can understand that that won't resonate with everyone, because at the end of the day, people just have preferences, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I can only tell you why I find it so compelling, and why I think millions of people always come back to the worlds of FromSoft games like Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Sekiro, or even Armored Core, with fascination and with this desire to experience it all over again, or in new ways or in interesting ways. Because at the end of the day, the plot to Armored Core 6 may be unique in the way that it conveys its narrative, but the actual beats and story moments of Armored Core 6 are relatively straightforward. But it's also some of the best application of Rule of Cool I've ever seen, and FromSoft nails the idea of being able to engage you into a story, not necessarily with a whole bunch of cutscenes or dialogue or exposition, but with the small scale or moments in time that the game just shines in terms of its Rule of Cool. And that it hooks you in and digs its claws deep within your psyche until you want to experience it more. The visualizations with Coral, which is like the sentient gasoline that is the focal point of the storyline throughout Armored Core 6, is absolutely beautiful in how it produces this eerie red contrast in the sky throughout various moments and missions. You may look at a character like Rusty and say, well, what really makes him so special and well-beloved? And it's not necessarily some kind of deep, complex backstory, flashback, or whatever that a lot of other narratives utilize to develop and flesh out their characters and to make you care about them. There's nothing wrong with that style, it's just that FromSoft and Armored Core tackles things a little bit differently. Rusty is a companion that you have throughout many missions of the game, sometimes at odds with, but more often than not, he's a buddy. And a bond is formed in the fires of war and all the battles that you share together until eventually your choices put either you two at odds or teaming up to take on the entire world. And there may not be a lot of dialogue or individual speeches in the game, but the dialogue is overall so well written that when it happens, it's meaningful and impactful. Like in the battle and at the end of Chapter 3 against the giant ice worm, essentially Rusty is at a far-away distance, piloting a giant laser cannon. And you have to take down this thing's shields so that he can headshot the jabroni. And the first time you knock down the thing's shields, and you hear Rusty charge up the giant laser beam, and he goes, "It's all or nothing. I won't miss!" He shouts out badass line after badass line. It's Rule of Cool done correctly. Because not every story needs to be some kind of 100-hour epic, with a bunch of plot twists and dynamic backstories and all of that. Sometimes just being cool is sufficient. And when you pair being cool within the confines of the aesthetics and the tone of the world, which FromSoft always nail, and you pair that together with consistency, then it can be engaging all of its own. The cinematography, the visuals, the pacing, the music that accompanies some of these really cool moments is great. I love all of the endings in this game. They all feel impactful, they all make sense to me, and they all provide some kind of unique and interesting resolution on the stories and themes the game provides up to that point. And the sense of scale in this game, it never feels like it's really holding you back because it's a game or because it would be too much. It's a desolate world populated with scattered characters, but each of those characters are boisterous, individualized, dynamic, and they leave a mark or an impression that they need to. They don't try and feel like they all have main character syndrome or feel like they have to be in the story for 20 hours to be interesting. Some of them are only in there for a singular mission, but throughout that mission they may trash talk you. Like we're back in Xbox Live in the 360 days, and you may get a little piece of context as to how they interact or their relationships with the rest of the cast are, but that's all you need, because sometimes these short and sweet narratives and these short and sweet story moments sometimes resonate all the more because they nail the pacing, because they are concise and they don't outstay their welcome. And Armored Core's story on the whole is something that starts off rather confusing and seemingly disjointed, but it comes together into a harmonious whole that just makes me want more. And if the game and FromSoft continue the trend that is famous for Armored Core, where there's normally 2 games in a series. I'm so excited for what the next game in the story could bring to the table, and what it could expand on, what it could extrapolate on, what it could even do. The game never loses its sense of identity, never tries to be something that it simply isn't. It understands its strengths, it understands that it's a game about giant robots battling it out on a post-apocalyptic landscape of a hell world filled with sentient gasoline and a bunch of corporations duking it out to gain control of that sentient gasoline. A bunch of sides all greedily going after their own self-interests, and you are stuck in the middle as this mercenary supposed to pick a side and hopping between them, fighting out what your place in this entire world and the greater conflict really is at the end of the day. Who can you trust? Who can't you trust? It's a mecha story done extremely well that doesn't try to be anything other than Armored Core 6. And sometimes, just being fun works better than trying to be deep and introspective when it's not applicable or when it's not needed. The game has those moments, but they don't outstay their welcome. They never feel really forced. Armored Core 6 is one of those games where I can play it at a surface level and have a fulfilling experience with all 3 of my playthroughs. And I don't need to delve further beneath the surface than what was provided to me. But I can also really start to deep dive into the story, and I can have a fun, interesting, and fulfilling experience either way I slice it. This is one of those games that I will revisit in the future. Probably every couple of years or so, if that, every year maybe. It's polished, well-paced, just fun and interesting, and beautiful to look at. And the story that accompanies it, in my opinion, is a unique idea in terms of conveying that story. Because let's be honest, an environmentalist message paired with corporations can suck is not exactly the most unique story ever told. But it doesn't need to be for Armored Core 6 to work, because it's the way that Armored Core 6 tells and conveys its narrative in a cool package that's fun, ambitious, dynamic, with a lot of scale to it. Interesting set pieces. It's just fun. It tries to be fun, and it is fun. No one moment really outstays its welcome, and it builds on everything that you, the player, have experienced in the game up to that point, and it works all the better because of that. And for all those reasons, that's why I love the story of Armored Core 6 and the way that it tells its story. Because while it may be a little bit off-putting at first, it comes together, and when it clicks, it really clicks, and I love stories like that. That can be enjoyable on a surface level, but if I want to dig beneath the surface and peel back its various layers, I have the option to do that as well, and it's interesting and fun and fulfilling either way I tackle it. And it's a world that I can't wait to dive back into all over again, whether in a New Game Plus playthrough in the future, or in a sequel or DLC at some point in the future. I'm down for whatever, and with that, I will call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in, my pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.